Gothic fantasy, medieval romance, temples of astrology, Oriental exotica, fairy tale castles, all made real. Their creator was one of the most extraordinary men of the Victorian age, a blue-blooded aristocrat who supported women's rights and striking miners, an intellectual who was a ghost hunter and a Welsh-speaking Scottish nationalist. But above all, John Patrick Crichton Stewart, 3rd Marquess of Bute, was a fabulously rich and visionary creator of great architecture.
And Bute has a huge amount of input into his buildings, pushing his architects to get something more exceptional. He has a strong sense of colour, of fun, of excitement and of extravagance, and that is what makes his buildings remarkable.
The decoration at Mount Stewart, at Castell Coch and here at Cardiff Castle speaks more powerfully of the personality of the man than so many other historic houses you'll ever go to.
It was in the Celtic cousins of Wales and Scotland where Bute made his dreams come true. His passions and interests were as wide as his purse was deep. Much of the money in that purse flowed in from the great city that the Bute family created.
It was the largest financial establishment outside the square mile in London. They made Cardiff. Cardiff would be an insignificant village without their inspiration.
He was certainly one of the richest men in the world, and I always say he's the richest man in Victoria's empire.
Portrait of John, 2nd Marquess of Bute, by Sir Henry Raeburn, the great Scottish portrait painter. And it captures the dynamism of the man who made the family fortune, the great industrialist, the man that really forges modern Cardiff. But flanking 2nd Marquess are not his parents, but his grandparents. The 1st Marquess of Bute himself, who marries the rich, ugly Charlotte Jane Windsor, the heiress of those Glamorgan estates. And this is how the Scottish family starts to get incredible wealth through their inherited estates in South Wales. So this is the beginning of the great family fortune.
The secret of the Bute family's immense wealth lay in the alchemy of turning Welsh coal into gold.
The 2nd Marquess of Bute knew if he could export coal effectively from his estates in Glamorganshire, he could turn Cardiff into, well, his phrase was, the new Liverpool or the second Liverpool. And that was his ambition.
The great advantage that we had here at Cardiff was that we had a wealthy landowner whose credit was good, so he could borrow money, no problem, and he owned the land, and he could say, look, there will be a dock here to service the industries that are developing on my land north of here. Very, very different, for instance, from the situation in Swansea, where you had the Swansea Harbour trustees who sat around, waffled a lot, had very good dinners and did nothing for decades. Here, one man could make it happen.
The first dock was built in 1839. The wealth it generated began to turn tiny, insignificant Cardiff into a major city. That first dock now lies under a dual carriageway close to Cardiff's iconic Wales Millennium Centre. But once from here poured the high-quality, hot-burning Welsh steam coal that would fuel Britain's great naval and merchant fleets.
South Wales steam coal turned out to be the perfect coal for the 19th century. And so in 1851, the Royal Navy gave its seal of approval to South Wales steam coal as the only coal that it will use, because the other great advantage of coal, of course, is that it is smokeless. So there was a definite tactical advantage in having the South Wales steam coal. And as steam propulsion powered the 19th century, so there was a demand for this coal throughout the world. And the price of that coal worldwide was decided here in Cardiff in the coal exchange every day. And it is an organisation comparable to what OPEC is today. It was the organisation that controlled what was the world's most important fuel source at that time.
It is said that the first ever £1 million cheque was signed in this building.
What the docks created was a huge pathway through which things flowed. And these flowing of goods, iron and coal mainly, that moved through Cardiff, they were what created the money. So the bulk of the Bute money that was actually created as wealth came from things like leaseholds. They would sell the leasehold on a block of land. People would build on that and develop that land because they needed houses for the workers. So the money doesn't come directly from the docks. The money comes from the spin-off, from the whole financial operation that is going on down there.
The dynamic second Marquess did not reap the rewards of his vision and investment. Just 5 months after the birth of his only son, he died suddenly of heart disease. The infant inherited the lot, the huge South Wales estate, much of the boom town of Cardiff, and the ancient ancestral lands on the Isle of Bute. The child was unexpected, the product of his 54-year-old father's second marriage. The birth was a severe disappointment to his father's brother, who thought he would inherit both title and fortune.
His uncle had enough bad taste to publicly hope that the child would die. Now, this was rather sort of off-putting for Bute's mother, and it didn't do much to make Bute love his uncle, as you can imagine.
The infant third Marquess's mother, Lady Sophia, consoled herself by raising and educating her son herself. From the start, young Bute was surrounded by his mother's strong and intelligent women friends.
I think the portrait shows how very close Bute and his mother were. She poured herself, heart and soul, into the education of her son. She taught him, she was his tutor. And inevitably, he absorbed a huge belief in the value of women, in their intelligence. He grew up believing that women were courageous and honest and worthy of every possible respect, and very, very close to her. So that when she died, when he was 12 years old, he was absolutely devastated and, of course, left completely alone in the world.
Blighted by grief, the next 6 years of Bute's life were further marred by quarrels among his guardians as to where and how he should be brought up and educated.
And he then passed into the hands of a particularly nasty guardian, a Victorian Major General of the old school. Even conservative Victorian friends, men even, disapproved of the way he treated Bute. And so Bute had a very, very rocky adolescence indeed. That picture, which was painted at the end of his mother's life, really is his last moment of true happiness until he came of age.
At 14, Bute went to Harrow. He would later write that he loathed it, but worked hard and showed an aptitude for languages. Holidays were spent travelling abroad, soaking up ideas and influences. What Bute saw in Greece, Constantinople and the Holy Land would one day be reflected in the buildings he would commission and partly design. Bute went to Oxford and when he was 18 met the eccentric architect William Burgess. The two men shared a passion for medieval art and design. Here, Burgess is painted as a medieval architect.
Well, Burgess was an odd-looking person. He was very short, rather rotund, extremely short-sighted. I think we'd think of him as an oddball these days, and certainly the Victorian establishment thought of him as rather odd. But there was something essentially lovable about Burgess.
Bute was young, shy and pious. He could hardly have been more different from Burgess, who was nearly 20 years older, bohemian, eccentric, grumpy and sociable. In this photograph, he's dressed as a court jester. At 21, amid celebrations in Wales and on the Isle of Bute, the young aristocrat came into his immense fortune.
The Bute estate once had to respond to a newspaper article in the 1860s about how rich is Lord Bute. Is he worth £300,000 a year, which is what the press was saying. And their reaction was to say, no, he's not. He's worth about half of that. So I'm quite happy to think his income was probably over £150,000 a year.
In today's terms, the 21-year-old Bute was worth more than £15 million a year.
He was very rich. He didn't have to bother with the mundanity of life. He went through life with a red carpet rolled out in front of him, with people saying, "My lord, how lovely to see you. Do come in, my lord. Can we get you anything?" He never had to think about where his dinner was coming from, where his wine cellar was coming from. That was entirely done for him. He could focus on reading, on walking, and on talking to the people who were building his buildings.
The young Marquess left the business of making money to trustees. His main interest was in spending it. His architect, William Burgess, was a genius, but an expensive one.
Meeting Lord Bute was absolutely meeting the dream client because Bute had the money, Burgess had the talent, and the combination of the two resulted in some of the most extraordinary buildings of the 19th century.
Both Bute and Burgess witnessed the building of the new Palace of Westminster. Its architects, Barry and Pugin, designed it in the Gothic Revival style, which was all the rage among the Victorian elite. Bute would make the style his own. He began by building a tower at Cardiff Castle.
Well, of course, when the family first got their hands on Cardiff in the 1760s, it didn't look anything like the building that you see today. It would have been much, much plainer, much smaller, but actually ancient. I mean, the castle's a Roman fort, a Norman Motte and Bailey castle, and the centre of the house is actually a late medieval mansion from the 1430s. Black gold from Wales was putting real gold on the ceilings of Lord Bute's houses in Scotland and here in South Wales. This was an escape from the industrial world, and it's quite extraordinary to think you've got this Welsh Victorian Camelot appearing in the middle of this new Chicago, as it was called, this fast expanding Welsh town. But he was turning his back on that.
Bute shared with Burgess a fascination with astrology, and the pair decorated Cardiff Castle's clock tower with astrology's magical symbols.
When you look at the outside of the clock tower, you can see those extraordinary statues in bright colours. Well, those are personifications of the planets. Bute was obsessed with astrology and astronomy. I think the people of Cardiff were a bit puzzled by it. Gilding, gold leaf for goodness sake, people didn't like it. Not the usual sort of decoration. So people thought it would be quite useful to tell the time. But apart from that, no, it wasn't popular. It's too in your face, I think.
Astrology also dominated the interior of the tower.
All around the tile decoration, we've got the legends of the zodiac. Up in the dome, we have the stars and the constellations. So it's astrological thought, and it's deeply personal to Bute. It's all of his interests and those of William Burgess, because it's William Burgess who interested him in astrology.
And of course, if you are very, very rich, you need not one, but 2 smoking rooms.
One for the summer and one for the winter. We're in the summer smoking room. It's much lighter, it's double height. And it was a sort of Victorian idea that it's a retreat for gentlemen to sit, to drink and to smoke. Well, it wasn't always actually tobacco that they smoked. Both Bute and Burgess smoked with either drug tobacco or with, indeed, opium.
When Bute was 18, he'd written in his diary, while on a visit to Greece,
"We went back to the divan and commenced a grand smoke, which lasted several hours. It was carried on with chill books filled with the strongest and most delicate drugged Turkish tobacco, fresh pipes being brought in continuously as soon as the old ones were 1/3 smoked."
There's an entry in Burgess's diary that says, "Too much opium last night, could not attend Miss Hayward's wedding." And this wasn't unusual for thinking, intellectual Victorians, but it does give the room a sort of hallucinogenic quality. Behind me, you've got these extraordinary, well, they're capitals of a column, but they're not like normal capitals. They're actually figures, nearly life-size, clambering out of them. And they are the winds. They are pairs of the 8 winds of classical antiquity. These are the north winds, and they're blowing from the north of the building. So mixed in with this sort of exoticism, you've got an awful lot of thought. I think Burgess and Bute, in the creation of this tower particularly, almost set each other off. I always think that, in a way, the barrel was loaded by Lord Bute and the gun was fired by William Burgess, and this is the resulting explosion.
Far from the fantasy being created in Cardiff, the family home on the Scottish Isle of Bute was the plain Georgian mansion house of Mount Stewart. But Lord Bute had plans for that too. In a wing of Mount Stewart House, Burgess created a private chapel for his patron. Bute had been born a Church of Scotland Presbyterian, but at the age of 21 converted to Roman Catholicism. The Victorian establishment was scandalised by Bute's conversion. The Glasgow Herald newspaper fretted over
priestly influences acting upon a weak and naturally superstitious mind.
There are a number of things that might have persuaded Bute to enter the Catholic Church. He'd seen it as a boy going around Europe, and it was associated in his mind with beauty and colour and lovely churches. He liked ritual, and he always had. So those were 2 things that pushed him towards it. Then the Catholic Church in that period put huge emphasis on what they called the communion of saints, the idea that those whom you have loved and died, they are just standing on the other side of an invisible wall. And because Bute had lost his mother, whom he loved so dearly, The idea that when he went to take communion, she was there around the table with him, and that was an attraction.
Tall, handsome, aristocratic, and fabulously rich, Bute was a catch. But at 23, he was still single. Rumours began to spread about the non-sporty, arty, unconventional, Catholic, and single young aristocrat.
So it hurt Bute very much when it was assumed that he was impotent or that he was gay, because he wasn't. He'd been in love with somebody or other all of his teenage years. And when he fell in love with Gwen, she was the last love of his life. And he loved her to his dying day.
18-year-old Gwendolen Mary Ann Fitzalan Howard was a granddaughter of the Duke of Norfolk, England's premier peer, and she was a Catholic. Society was agog at the marriage of the seemingly oddball aristo.
I think the rumours that spread that he hadn't managed to consummate his marriage hurt him very much indeed, and they were extraordinarily far from the truth. Bute had decorated a room at Cardiff as his wife's bedroom.
I shall have a bedroom fitted up with red silk for you, as that will suit your complexion.
As was, of course, completely proper. He moved in there to spend his wedding night with her. The expectation of an aristocrat would be that he then moved out and left her her own bedroom. But the Butes never managed that. They continued to share a bedroom all of their lives.
The couple spent part of their honeymoon at Cardiff Castle, where Team Burgess was busy completing the rooms of the clock tower. Gwen soon became fond of the eccentric architect.
We have a wonderful set of correspondence from Lady Bute to her sister Angela, which shows very much the relationship that she had with Burgess, and it shows you how much Burgess was ingrained in the family. So this letter from September 1873 from Cardiff Castle to her sister Angela talks about William Burgess himself. In fact, she actually even draws this wonderful little sketch of Burgess with his set of binoculars here. And she writes here, "This is ugly Burgess who designs lovely things. Isn't he a duck?"
Burgess continued to make lovely things for the Butes at Cardiff Castle, even though the family only spent about 6 weeks a year there.
Isn't this extraordinary? We're actually in a genuine medieval part of the castle, but of course everything you're looking at, the walls, the floor, all of the decoration, is all William Burgess, all 3rd Marquess of Bute, all 1870s. So what are they trying to do, you ask? It's quite an odd thing to recreate a noble hall of the Middle Ages, but they're actually doing it with a degree of authenticity. So all the decoration, including this chimney piece, tells the story of the medieval history of the castle. And also we've got wonderful things like the hammer beam ceiling. There's a lot of strange decoration in here as well. We've got medieval grotesques, pigs playing bagpipes, things that have been copied from medieval design. Medieval style design is everywhere. If you look up into the ceiling, you'll see angels holding shields. These are all shields bearing Lord Bute's ancestors' arms. Bute was very keen on Welsh culture, and he decided that he would have Welsh singing in here, Welsh harpists, and actually that gets taken up in some of the Welshness in the decoration. We have scenes from the Mabinogion, the Welsh fairy stories in here, and also things like the story of Gelert as well, and Prince Llewellyn's dog. So they have tried to introduce an element of Welshness in amongst all this Scottish heraldry.
Central to any house built by Bute was a library.
I think this is the room in Cardiff Castle that is more personal to Bute than any other. It's almost like his academic engine room. His interests and thoughts are revealed in the decoration. When you look at the bookcases themselves, they again reflect Bute's interest not only in heraldry but also in animals, the animal kingdom. All sorts of creatures, including tiny things like there's a stag beetle and underneath the lock plate of each of one of those drawers in that bookcase. It's all part of Bute's love of the natural world.
Beyond the walls of Bute's extraordinary escape from the modern world lay the bustling industrial Cardiff that his father had created. By the late 19th century, foreign sailors had settled and married into the working-class community of Bute Town. Neil Sinclair is a product of Cardiff's Tiger Bay.
Well, I'm standing in front of Bute Crescent, and this is a very special area because it's the earliest. In the 1830s, the second Marquis of Bute, John Crichton Stewart, organised the building of these particular magnificent structures as a sort of pump priming for other developers to follow a suit and build buildings of equal calibre throughout the community of Tiger Bay and the docks, officially known as Bute Town. The kind of people that lived in these grand homes when it was a crescent were the sea captains, the shipping magnates, the colliery owners, etc., who would look out of their windows over to the Oval Basin. And of course, so when they saw their ships going out laden with coal, they'd wring their hands and run around the corner to Bute Street where all the new banks were being built, because we were a major banking centre. And so that gives you an idea of what John Crichton Stewart had initiated when he first built Bute Crescent.
Although the third Marquis didn't have his father's interest in business, he couldn't resist building an elaborate Gothic-style new head office for the Bute Dock Company. The Pierhead building remains a much-loved Cardiff landmark.
It was William Frame's Gothic masterpiece in red terracotta stone, iconic building that seamen from all over the world who had settled and had families in Tiger Bay and the docks, and they recognised instantly when the ship turned the Penarth head there and they saw the Pierhead building, they knew they were home and they would sail into Cardiff docks.
A few miles inland from Cardiff and the commotion of the city's docks, Bute and William Burgess created another Gothic fantasy, a fairy tale castle. Castell Coch had been nothing more than a pile of ruins.
The castle that you see today is the recreation of the third Marquis of Bute and William and Burgess. It looks as if it's been wafted here from the Rhine or the Loire. It doesn't look very British, it certainly doesn't look very Welsh. And what it is Bute's idea of recreating, in almost in every detail, a medieval castle. It's certainly an icon now, because when you drive to the west of Wales, or you're driving back from the west, you see this extraordinary vision up on the hillside. It certainly commands attention. The Butes only used it very, very occasionally. They would bring visitors out here. You know, part of 19th century living was entertaining people. So you would take people on an excursion to the ruins. Well, they could do a bit better here. You could take visitors out to Castell Coch, send lunch out, have roaring fires prepared for you, and take people around your castle, which must have been enormous fun. And I love Burgess's comment at the end of his report, where he says, "Inside, my lord, I ventured to indulge in a little more ornament." Well, you know exactly what that means when it comes to William Burgess. I think this has got to be one of the most romantic rooms in Wales. You can't help smiling when you come into it. Although, I suppose, in a way, that the theme of the room is quite serious, because Burgess's designs They radiate out from a great fireplace or a ceiling, and behind me we've got this wonderful chimney piece which sets the theme of the room, the three Greek fates. One is spinning the thread of life, the other is measuring its length, and then the third on the end is cutting it. So it's all about the cycle of life and representing the three ages of man. So there's a serious theme, but when you look up into the ceiling, again, it's pure delight. The center of it is the sun. Radiating from the sun, we have the ribs, all decorated with butterflies, birds of the air, the stars, a little bit like some of the decoration and ceilings at Mount Stuart and at Cardiff Castle as well. But here there's quite a bit more fun going on, because as we get down to the walls, there is trees and plants, birds hopping about in their branches, and hanging from each branch is a cord, and the cord is hanging a real painting, all the members of the Bute family. There's also light-heartedness going on with scenes from Aesop's fables. So we've got the fox and the hare and so on and so forth. It's great fun. It's a room with, like so many designs, with great zest and verve and enjoyment. And it's meant to be enjoyed. I think it's meant to put that smile on your face. Virtually circular room is that it's a mixture of practicality and impracticality. Practicality with things like the radiator covers. So you've got central heating here, which was put in right at the beginning in the 1870s. And then wonderfully impractical furniture, such as the washstand, which, whilst it has hot and cold water towers, and they are literally towers, they had to be filled by hand. And the wardrobe. Well, think of what the sort of clothes that Lady Bute would have worn. Very large dresses. They all had to be folded and put in there. You might perhaps get one in there. But on the other hand, when you are lying in this wildly eccentric bed with glass knobs at the corners, you could look up into a wonderful ceiling. And you've got monkeys and squirrels. They all have a particular symbolism. The squirrels are playing with pomegranates. It's a sign of fruitfulness. Perhaps it's appropriate in a double bedroom. Beneath them, we've got monkeys playing around in the foliage there. And above that, grapevines. And how appropriate that is, because if you looked out of the windows of this room and looked down to Cardiff, wonderful views, but directly below the castle was a vineyard, the only working commercial vineyard in Britain in the 19th century.
The transformation of Castell Coch from ruin to fairy tale castle took 16 years. But William Burgess never lived to see it completed. He caught a chill while working on site and died in 1881. In the banqueting hall, a mural depicts St. Lucius, an early British king, directing his master mason. Or are they really Bute and Burgess? Bute and Gwen returned to the Isle of Bute, where Gwen discovered she was pregnant. Her health was always fragile, and her doctor ordered her not to travel and to rest. At Mount Stuart on Christmas Eve 1875, Gwen gave birth to a daughter, Margaret. Bute was present at the birth. Not the usual place for a Victorian gentleman.
I think the best picture we have of him, and the tenderest, is the one where he's nursing an infant child. He's got this tiny baby, which he is cradling. And that's the only picture I know of a Victorian man holding a tiny baby. It wasn't something men did. But that's a lovely picture of him, of a nice, warm, tender person caught slightly off guard, rather than a Victorian aristocrat plumped down. You can't imagine anything further from a Victorian aristocrat than Bute was.
In 1877, while the Butes were away, Mount Stuart caught fire. The main building was reduced to a burnt-out shell. To any other aristocrat, it would have been a disaster. But the ever-creative Bute turned the disaster into triumph.
Of its time. And when you strip away all the medieval veneer of this as well, the guts, the skeleton of this building, it's steel, it's the materials of the railway age, the industrial age, not the medieval period. So he was very much a man of his time and also a man of the future, as well as somebody that did have a great obsession with the past. Well, soaring to a height of 80 feet, this is the dark and mysterious heart of Mount Stuart, crowned by the constellations of the Northern Hemisphere, each star in its exact position. And then as you come down, you then see these wonderful zodiac stained glass windows. You can travel the whole course of the seasons just by following them round from spring to summer to autumn and then into those cold winter colours. And then as we come down a bit further, we'll see the figures also representing the signs of the zodiac that were commissioned from Carrara in Italy by Lord Bute himself.
In June 1881, Gwen bore her first son, John. Two more sons followed, Ninian, named after the saint who first brought Christianity to Scotland, and Colum. While he and Gwen doted on Margaret, the Butes had been desperate for a male heir. As a female, Margaret could inherit her father's Scottish estate and titles, but not the British title of Marchioness. Neither could she inherit the majority of the Bute wealth. With male heirs to spare, Bute's line and family fortune were at last secure, and Mount Stuart became a playground.
The hall was a place of great fun. We know the Bute children put on plays here to great entertainment. For people from all walks of life across the estate were invited to those. We know that they also played badminton here. There were badminton sets kept in a chest in the hall so that the children could play when there weren't people around. This wasn't a place really to entertain the sort of bigwigs. This was a place of erudition. It was a place of fun as well. As the third Marquess's biographer once said, was it ever such a hall to play hide and seek?
Bute's daughter, Margaret, didn't have the same rights of inheritance as her brothers. But her father passionately believed in women's education and gave her the best.
At the time that this corridor was being created, Bute was educating his daughter. Formidably clever, a bit of a flibbity-gibbet as regards her mind, not terribly focused. And I think what we see here is Bute trying to inspire her. Every single head in this corridor is the head of a woman. And they're a fairly mixed bunch. We have goddesses, we have heroines from mythology, and I think he is trying to inspire her. Look how many beautiful, clever, intelligent, difficult, demanding women there are in the world, all the way up here. But, I mean, it is typical of Bute that whatever he is interested in, that
The memory of the family of the Marquis of Bute was quite strong. My mother used to tell me when I was a child, you know, the streets in our area were named after family members. And, you know, I took that for granted as a child, but as an adult and an archivist and an historian, I did look into it, and sure enough, the names are in the family tree.
And there's the animal wall in front of Cardiff Castle. Surely Lord Bute's most surreal legacy to the city, his family created.
The animal wall is a lovely feature of Cardiff. Anybody who's grown up in Cardiff always remembers as a child seeing those animals looming at you from way above your head. But I can honestly say that it's one of the best loved features of the city of Cardiff, all due to the Butes.
Tomorrow night on BBC4, artists with dwarfism give a new perspective on the way they've been represented in art through the ages. Dwarfs in Art at 9.